grew up in a very computer-savvy household, and I guess that's really shaped both my life and my career more than pretty much anything. My dad was one of the first generation of computer programmers. He was involved in automating banks, so we travelled around the world quite a lot when I was very little. But I didn't really like it, and I started work in my early career as a software developer, but didn't really enjoy that. I really love computers and I love coding for fun, and I love making things, and I think computers are the most wonderful, creative, expressive devices that humankind has ever created. But that's not really what being a software developer is like a lot of the time. So I started looking at the more creative side of it and trying to use computers to teach and to tell stories. When the web was commercialized in 1994, I was on it. I was already kind of in position to understand what it could do and take advantage of it. And then so I ended up starting a company with my brother and two friends. My brother walked into an ISP. There was a little local ISP that started in the small town where my parents lived. This is like early summer of 1995, and they were just selling dial-up connections. So you could buy a little modem and diskette with some software on it to connect to the internet. Really, really early. And he went in and he asked them if they had a website, and they hadn't, and they had no idea how to make one. And it was on their list of things to do, but they didn't know when they would get round to it. And my brother, he's 4 years younger than me, but it's totally in keeping with who he is. He immediately said, if I build your website, will you give me a free connection? Because there's no way he could afford, the subscription, the monthly subscription for a dial-up connection at the time. And they immediately said, yes, if you can build us a website, then we'll give you free dial-up. And he came home, and I happened to be on holiday, and he started building a computer out of spare parts that we had lying around the house to connect this package that he got. He was so excited about connecting it. He had no idea how to build a website, but I did. So I spent the rest of that holiday learning how to build a website and never went back to work. And we started a company. By 2001, we had about 45 employees and turned over £2.5 million. And yeah, and it was a brilliant time, really, just the early days of the web, and so that shaped me more than anything. But really, it wasn't just about what you could do with the technology. It was how to build a team, how to make these things work. And then the dot-com boom, the bust hit, dot-com bust. We ended up liquidating the company, and I felt like I needed to go back and study what I should have studied in the first place. So I went back to understand more about how the world works. I wanted to study philosophy and history, and ended up on a course in Brighton. And then 4 years later, I graduated with a first-class degree. I moved to Sheffield to be with the girl who's now my wife. And I joined a small agency, or a medium-sized agency really at the time, and I set about introducing project management and process, and getting that company kind of functioning properly, getting it, professionalizing the roles, introducing processes and training people. We were very early to adopt agile software development methodologies, and that company started to grow very rapidly, and I was made a director of business innovation. So my job was essentially to look at technologies and understand and teach our clients what those technologies mean, and figure out how we could use them and how we could get value from them. It was a very successful company, and so the owners of the company decided to sell, and they sold the company to a large PLC. I had young children at the time, and my children were going to grow up in Sheffield, and I felt like I needed to work to make sure that they had better opportunities. There was something I could do to shift this city from declining industrial city into a burgeoning 21st century knowledge industry city. I used to host TEDx Sheffield, so for 4 years I was the producer or co-producer of TEDx Sheffield. So I've hosted many talks and worked with a lot of speakers, but I've never given a talk. So I mean, I guess the fact that it's tomorrow means it has to be something that I'm already familiar with. From a tech perspective, the biggest issue we've got is around the use and misuse of our digital platforms, and how our digital platforms are enabling negative narratives and misinformation, and the business models that underpin the digital platforms that are increasingly shaping our lives and our communication. They privilege and they incentivize certain behaviors and disincentivize other behaviors. There's a connection to be drawn. There are fundamental problems in the business models that underpin most of our digital communications. So I think I'd probably do a TED Talk about that exciting topic. You have to really understand why you're making something and who you're making it for. Because there's always these two things, right? There's what to make and there's how to make it. And how to make it is very complicated and difficult and requires a lot of specialism and a lot of thought and a lot of effort, but it is relatively easy compared with what to make. And so understanding what to make is a really much harder question and a really important question. And sometimes in the commercial world, it's relatively straightforward to understand what you should be making. But when it comes to broader societal questions, it's not such an easy decision. So there's a thing called solutioneering or technology-driven innovation, where people have a good idea, they realize how a piece of technology can be used, and it's relatively simple to make it do that. They create a very good product, but they don't address the right problem in the right way, or they try and solve a societal problem with technology. And problems are much more wicked than that. They're much more interconnected and problematic, and that's what the master's degree is about, is to give people the perspectives necessary to understand where their propositions are weak and how to strengthen them by bringing people in who can represent those different perspectives and different positions. It's an iterative process. You have to continually test and relearn to make sure that you're on the right track. The only way to do that is by collaborating with people and collaborating with the people that are going to be affected by the thing that you're designing. So we founded Sheffield Digital in 2015. It was me and 4 other kind of experienced veteran professionals in the digital industries in Sheffield. And we'd always felt that much more could be done to bring the community together of people who work in tech and work in digital media, to bring the companies together, to promote what happens here, to promote the story that Sheffield has to tell about its digital industries. The official agencies that are responsible for our economic policy weren't doing the job properly. And they didn't really understand that. They didn't understand digital as a sector, and they didn't understand it as a new realm of doing business. And both of those things are important. So that's what led us eventually to say, we can't rely on other people to do this. So we went and we pulled together a coalition of the sort of larger local tech companies and stakeholders, including both universities, who both came on board immediately. And we started, promote, connect, represent. Those are our 3 missions, basically. So to promote what happens here, to get messages and stories out about the tech industry and what gets made here, to connect, to bring the community together, to get them collaborating, to create spaces where they can ask questions and talk to each other, and representing the interests of our industry to policymakers locally in the city, regionally and nationally, and communicating strategy back down again. But we've built, over the last 5 years, we've built a very strong brand and a very strong message about this. And we are invariably consulted when questions about anything digital comes up, not just digital industry, but especially the future of work, skills, training, digital inclusion, connectivity, and then, of course, economic policy. So yeah, we provide a voice for the companies in the city. There has to be an alignment of values, and the contracts need to be written smartly enough so that improvements that can be made and cost savings are shared amongst the contributing partners. So it doesn't all accrue to the private entity, that the public can benefit as well. But actually flexibility is really important, because Certainly up until fairly recently, a lot of contracts don't consider Moore's law, they don't consider the rapid change in technology and methods for doing certain things, and imagine that the current state of the art is going to be the state of the art in 5 or 10 years' time, when it patently isn't, and don't have much flexibility to adjust for this. So yeah, those are the things that I would say. These are covered in depth on the course, so there is a whole unit on PPPs and how best to manage them, and with lots of case study examples. But you know, I think values is key. You know, you can specify a lot of things in contracts, but there's always things that go missing in contracts, things that people don't take into account. And sometimes those things are aesthetic. Very often you'll see a PPP contract that calls for the replacement of street lighting, you know, to make it more efficient and to connect up a network, you know, part of sensorization and things like that, and maybe even to provide revenue streams in terms of providing attachment points on street furniture for other access points, cameras and things like that. But there's nothing in there about the aesthetics of the street light, and actually what the street light looks like is much more impact on citizens than how much it costs to run. Contracts can miss what really matters to citizens, and actually what matters is their pride in their environment. There is a hard definition of smart cities and there's a soft definition of smart cities. The idea is that the hard definition is about technology, and it's about making cities more efficient more than anything. It's about applying digital technology to the operations of a city. So thinking about how the city currently operates and adding, you know, traffic monitoring and control in order to make the flows of traffic easier, cheaper to manage and make them more efficient. But then there's also a soft definition. There's also the definition around how digital technologies, how these technologies in their aggregate are affecting life, are affecting the way that cities work, the way that people work, the way that communities work, the way people interact, the way they live their lives. And so it's much more about the impact of digital technology on progress and development. You know, sometimes it's better to take a narrow definition, a hard definition, and say, well, we're just looking at this one aspect of it. And other times it's really important to take the soft definition and to consider how all of these things are acting on individuals and acting on communities. And so that's what we mean by holistic. Holistic means we look at the way that digital technologies are affecting people and affecting the way that the city operates across a lot of different dimensions. And we've done a lot of work on understanding what those different dimensions are and kind of categorizing them into different domains and understanding, you know, how they relate to each other. And I genuinely think, and it's one of the things that I want to help to achieve with the course, is that by having people who understand things in that broader context, you can create interventions that make a positive difference in multiple places. It's not a zero-sum game, right? If you make an advance over here, you're not detracting from something over here. If you think about it and you involve, you know, things in other areas, you can make a positive impact in multiple dimensions at once. And to me, that's what innovation, good innovation, is really about. Someone said once that innovation was making was advancing in 2 games at once with a single move, and that's kind of what I want to get across. You know, you can stitch things together that have more impact because they're considering more things. So if you're making an advance in energy production, or, you know, resilience, or, you know, waste to energy or something, you know, can that also have a positive impact on education? Can it have a positive impact on digital inclusion? Can you figure out a way to make those things to affect something positively that is not your immediate domain? There's this other kind of idea of cities and development of cities, you know, can be being formulated in 3 different directions, right? You can think about it in terms of the technopolis, where you use technology to make systems, operations more efficient. You can think about it in terms of the ecopolis, where you're trying to have a positive benefit on the environment and on sustainability and on the climate, on your resource use. And you can think about it as the anthropolis, where you're trying to have a positive impact on people, on citizens, on the way we live, on our life chances. we can list all of these different values and all these different kind of aspects that we want to promote in this work, but the why needed a much more foundational, grounded, philosophical anchor. So I kind of draw on Catherine Audard, who's a French philosopher who was talking about this ability to view citizens having the ability to turn resources into value themselves, and what it takes for them to be able to do that, rather than just trying to maximize resources. There's a quote from Camus at the top of it, where he says, freedom is just a chance to be better. And that's really what needs to anchor all of these different projects. And so I would encourage practitioners to think about how their project is increasing freedom of citizens, because a lot of the projects that we're involved in are very distant from citizens. They're about making things cheaper to administrations, or they're about being able to do things, to monitor things better. But are we missing opportunities to enhance the freedom of our citizens by only focusing on these things in terms of their material value, and only in terms of resources, and not in terms of citizens as autonomous, empowered beings that have a right to make their lives better? Yeah, well, I think what's happening in Toronto is still interesting. There's now a new plan for a much more citizen-centred conception of development in Toronto. India Smart Cities mission, there was a big review, and it's now been massively expanded, so that's going to be very interesting to watch as well. Obviously, Singapore is like a shining case study of how to build citizen-centric technologies. But it's a very different governance environment, and China's a very different governance environment as well. So I think looking at those cities is always really interesting. I think in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of cities, there's a lot of property investment going into cities, and whereas in Europe, it's much more about retrofitting. American cities are all trying to figure out how to move away from being planned around the automobile, and how to manage their energy and resources and densities. South America as well, I think there's a really fascinating project that ran for 5 years called the Smart Metropolis in Brazil, which I think is really interesting, and it's interesting from a technical point of view because of the open source IT infrastructure that they use, and the architecture of how they built that platform and how they built it as an open platform, and as a case study for how other service providers and startups and research programs can build new functionality and value. Design thinking provides a framework within which to do innovation and design, for the design to come from interactions with people, interactions with the users, with people that are experiencing the thing that you're trying to address. So that's what I tell founders. That's how I work with them. Yeah, to get people to really test their assumptions and to immerse themselves in an issue that they're trying to address. So design thinking is about that, about finding a challenge and then trying to understand, empathize with people and work with them to iterate solutions. And then the digital ecosystems is about looking at a digital ecosystem and understanding what the forces are that are acting on it and where new value can be created. So I kind of contrast two different ways of understanding where there are opportunities to make a difference. The people that join the program tend to come from specialisms that are within that overall framework, but they're people who understand a particular area quite well, but realize that area is connected to these other areas and don't really have a way of understanding how to think about those connections or what's really going on, what to trust, what to believe, who to believe, what to consider, who to involve, what kind of impact they could have. So these are kind of mid-career professionals that understand a particular vertical. The innovation agency IDEO used to talk about T-shaped people, that they really would look for T-shaped people. So people that have a very distinct vertical specialism, but also understand horizontally a broad range of different topics and where they therefore fit in, and that those are the people that you're looking for. And individual specialisms also change very rapidly, and people are looking to move their careers up so that they can start to be involved in decisions about what to make in a broader sense. So that's why it's such a diverse range. We have technology people, software people, but also built environment people, architects, planners, we have administrators. That's really at the heart of the degree. It gives you the language to use with fellow professionals, even though you're from different specialisms, to be able to talk to each other and understand, the assumptions and the concepts that go into that. I was at a presentation once where, well, I won't say which company, but a company was presenting their roadmap, their technology roadmap for sensorization, and they were talking about the sensors at the edge, and they were talking about the compute and communications and data services that they had, and they were talking about where each of these different technology strands was going in future and how far they'd got. But what they didn't have was applications. Like the applications area was completely blank. They had no idea what to do with this stuff. They knew, all of the roadmaps for creating smaller, more accurate sensors were mapped out. The technology was essentially solved in these areas, but the applications are not. And I think really the technologies that are going to make the biggest difference are around governance, around rights, around data rights, around how to build technologies that are inclusive, that take people's information and use it in a way that is protected. The technologies are not necessarily the technologies themselves, but how we use them. So privacy by design, building privacy into the very architectures of the technology that we create, and then wrapping those in regulations and guidance and legal entities, alongside outreach and education for citizens. Resilience is kind of it's a loaded word, it's a complex word. There's lots of different kinds of resiliences, right? So there's resource resilience, so how resilient is the city? So that encompasses a whole range of different things, and digital technology has a role to play in a lot of those things around resources. So energy, for example, food resources, urban farming and growing supply chains, logistics, all of those things are enabled by digital technology, and where they already exist, made much more efficient and effective by digital technology. So that's one side of it. Obviously, there's also a sense in which digital technology increases the risk, right? So where you've got manual processes that are quite open and available, visible, interactable to people, you can change things on the fly quite easily. When you've got stuff hard-coded into computer systems, that when the system goes down, no one can do anything, then you've basically broken your resilience. So a lot of the systems that we create need to have fallbacks, or they need to have the ability to route around problems and to carry on going even when part of the network is taken out. And that's about kind of resilient networking and network design, and making sure that there are protocols in place for business continuity and to carry on delivering services to citizens and to other stakeholders when things go wrong, including hacks and cybersecurity events and things like that, which obviously is a very big issue. And then there's also resilient people. Like, how resilient is the population? So to me, that resilience thing, when you unpack it, there's an awful lot that you can do in those areas. And so digital technology, again, has a big role to play in helping our citizens feel and become more resilient. I've been thinking about this and working on smart cities for a long time, and I am fully aware that there's a lot of negative connotations to smart, that citizens don't really understand what smart means, that the idea of treating a city as if it's a phone and making a smart city like a smartphone makes no sense. But it's a term that is understood around the world as meaning the interaction and intersection between digital technologies and urbanism, urban life. I prefer to say digital development of places. There are more places than just cities. There are smart regions. There is a lot to be done for the digital development of rural communities. But I think the smart city agenda covers the areas in which I'm interested in how digital development is working. So what are the impacts of the technology that I've grown up with and have been such a core part of my life in all of these different areas that I'm really interested in and have been interested in. The ability to be the director of this program means that I get to meet a lot of people that are thinking about the same things that I'm thinking about, both students and professors, and that we can craft a curriculum that really furnishes people with the right insights and the right knowledge and the right contacts to be able to go out and make a difference in the world. So I feel absolutely lucky and blessed, to be honest, to be in this position and to be able to affect so many other people around the world. And to be able to kind of play a small role and be able to follow their stories and the difference they're able to make.